Hello, this is the first bet. And every successful person gets interviewed about how they won, but very few people drag them back to the moment before they knew it would work, when the information was thin, the money was real, and they pushed their chips in anyway. That's what we do here at the first bet. I'm Martin Tobias, Managing Director of Incisive Ventures, and I've made bets three ways: as a VC, as a poker player, and as a CEO. My guest today is Alex Mcnaughton, and he built a career training salespeople how to sell, ran an advisory of over 130 businesses in New Zealand before he was 30. Then he saw what was coming with AI and thought that that could add a scalable way to help more people, I think. And he actually made a pretty significant bet of selling what he was doing in New Zealand and moving his life and whole company to San Francisco without a Stanford PhD, without a big network, and made a major life bet on a new company in a new place. I actually backed him in that bet, and I'm pretty excited to hear him talk about that decision. Alex, welcome to the first bet.
Martin, thanks for having me on the show. Excited to talk to you today.
Cool. Well, maybe you could take us back, to that time, when you decided to make this major life change, first into the company and then second into the, going to America thing. What
Yeah.
was going through your mind?
Well, I'll set the scene a little bit. I just turned 30 and, I had two companies that I was running, both profitable, lived in New Zealand. Like I lived right by the beach, had a sea view, like 1 minute to the
Nice.
ocean. Like life was good, like life was good. I think I've taken home like $500,000 a year, which in San Francisco terms doesn't sound like a lot, but in New Zealand, that goes really, really, really
That's
far.
a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess like the decision point for me was, like saw the AI kind of wave like just starting, and I'd been reintroduced to two friends of mine, Alistair and Dan, who were keen to build something but didn't know what to build. And they're like wicked smart, like a million times more technical than me. Alistair had just graduated from Cambridge with a master's in machine learning. And I guess the decision for me was like, do I like go all in on this like new tech, new tech wave, new people who I'd never worked with before and new country? Or do I just kind of stay on the same trajectory I'm currently going on and, just keep growing what I'd already built? And yeah,
And
so
how
that
did
that
you
was kind of the
how
decision
did you
point.
think about that? What frameworks did you use? Did you think about Jeff Bezos's regret minimization framework or anything like that? Or think it was an interesting opportunity to work with your friend who was a technical person? What were some of the ways that you weighed leaving a little bit of security for an unknown risky thing?
So there was a few things going through my mind. There was like the first thing was like, okay, I'm curious about working with these guys and I want to like work more in AI. So how do I minimize the risk of that going wrong and like figure out quickly, can we work together for 10 years and like be in the trenches for 10 years? So that was like part of the decision and what
People.
we the people, and that was a big part of the decision. And they'd come introduced to me through someone I really trust and respect, so that helped. But what we actually did is through my last company, we put a small piece of money aside, kind of funded a trial marriage, I would call it, where we worked
Okay.
together for 90 days to see if we liked working together, basically, and build some stuff together and solve some problems for my then customers through that company. And that kind of became our initial seed capital, basically. So that was like one part of the decision making process. But then I think like the bigger part for me was more, will I regret not going big here versus like the, I guess, safe and comfortable life that I had like already built and was continuing to build. And, the upside of go build a venture backed AI company is huge. And the downside of like, well, I could always just come back to that, or kind of, at least I'd have an interesting story to tell and I could go kind of like fail up if it didn't work out and like work on something else interesting. So that was kind of how I looked at it. It was like a very asymmetric bet, and ultimately made the call to go all in and sell my company and move to San Francisco.
Yeah. So what was what were some of the additional things that were in the back of your mind that were sort of talking against it, or the arguments against going all in. Part of it is, and I know you had to get your girlfriend, and your teammates had to get their girlfriends to go there too. Was family or friends saying no, or what were some of the things that were arguing against making the all in commitment at the time?
So I think friends thought I was kind of mad, to be honest with you, because, like I said, like life was good. Like in New Zealand, life's good. Like I'm spending a lot of time with friends and family. Like I'm working a lot less hard than I do today for a lot more money. And so they thought I was kind of crazy. My family, interestingly enough, like would back me into just about anything. I think they've like learned to, ever since I dropped out of college, they've kind of just learned to just like let me do what I want to do and that it's going to work out okay. So they were actually behind me. And my partner was also, she was very supportive through this and kind of was like, hey, it's your decision and I'll move with you. But so the thoughts going through my mind though, which is like kind of like that nagging thought in the back of your mind though, is always like, what's the opportunity cost of this? Like,
Right.
okay, like you turn off the taps of like what you've been earning. How long is it going to take for you to like get to that same level of earning again? What's the opportunity cost of like what that money invested could have been doing for you? Like we did have two properties back in New Zealand. I just sold one. So there was definitely like that kind of thinking going on. But again, the way I looked at it was always like, well, the upside's so big here and I will regret forever not going after this. And uh,
Hmm.
the opportunity to support millions of people and transform a profession that, from our perspective, like I think needs a lot, needs change and needs to be done better. That outweighed any, I guess, reduction in net worth growth that would have happened otherwise.
So there was a little bit of a capped downside, asymmetric upside. Talk to me a little bit more about how much in the back of your mind was a little bit of the frustration with your prior business, the lack of scalability and the opportunity related to AI. Because I think you really loved your job. You liked helping people, but you were maybe a little bit constrained in your ability to help people at scale. And so I think a big part of it was the opportunity to continue to do what you were good at, but at a grander scale. Was that part of it, or how did you think about that?
That's definitely a big part of it. I looked at really the jump as a continuation of my life's work.
Right.
And I know that sounds kind of crazy when you're like 30. It's not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that much life, but that's kind of what it felt to me was like, well, I've been able to support two or 300 companies through doing things in a very manual, human-led kind of services way. Imagine what we can do now with this kind of technology. And to me, it just felt like a very like this is going to sound silly, but it actually was a really easy decision, and I didn't like wrestle with it very long. It was actually quite like once I sat down and thought about it, it was actually like maybe despite from what people thought from the outside, it was actually a really simple decision. It was like, hell yeah, like let's go to San Francisco and do this properly.
Okay. It turns out, as I've talked to many people who make big decisions, they're easier than they look from the outside. Let me just ask you one other thing about the potential, case against it. One of the things that got me interested is that you were in sales technology, but doing a little more sales coaching, and you were taking a very different approach. At the time when you started it, there had been a lot of AI sales tech funded, all these AI SDRs, these Outrage, these sales loft. There was kind of in venture capital land, maybe people thought it was an overdone thing I mean, how did you think about the risk of competition? You're going to San Francisco, but there was already a lot of heat in this sales area. Did that bother you at all, or how did you think through what you were doing in relation to all the other stuff that was being done at the time? That certainly was a risk that VCs
Yeah.
might not want to fund yet another thing like that.
Look, that was definitely a risk, and like one of the big risks is like, can we get funding for this thing? And
Yeah.
what you just described definitely came up. The way I saw it, and maybe it's because I just lived in this world for so long, is that I just strongly believed that the world and the sales world just didn't need another email spam cannon, which is what I saw with like a lot of like, a lot of what was being like a lot of what the money and attention seemed to be going on like how can we send more emails, how can we like do more top of funnel volume. And I just felt that there was this like missing hole, which is like, okay, well that's part of sales, but what about the rest of it? What about from first conversation through the close through to ongoing customer relationships? And it didn't feel like there was much going on that was like meaningfully making the world a better place for all of that. And, there's 5.7 million B2B salespeople in the US, tens and tens of millions globally. And that just felt like a huge opportunity. And we just needed to ultimately find the right investors who saw that with us.
Okay. So if I could summarize, you were starting something new that was unknown, but you just told me three ways that you minimize the risk in this new one. One is the fact that the opportunity was asymmetric, that you could help a lot more people than your traditional. It was continuing something you'd already done, but at potentially a much greater scale, and that was one way to do it. The second way is that you were going to work with new people that you might not have worked with before. So you did this 90-day try before you buy. So you got a little more information about them as a way to reduce the risk of working with new people. And then the third is that you were going into a potentially crowded category, but you thought deeply about what the other people were doing, and you came up with what you thought was a different way to help salespeople than the majority of the people. So a differentiated product strategy. Is that fair? Those three things?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And, on the impact piece, a year into moving to San Francisco, we've already had like many multiples bigger impact on the sales profession than I had in my previous services type businesses a year into moving here. So that's already coming true and continuing to grow, which is exciting and very rewarding.
Okay. So it's turning out better than you thought. That's good. So what, you know, were the other gremlins, or what were the unexpected things that you faced in the year or two after you made that decision? Uh,
So making the decision's one thing, and then you actually have to go and like make it happen.
yeah.
And like, like the things that you don't know when before you make a decision. So like some of them are like very operational, like, okay, well, we want to move to the US. Like, how do we actually get there? Like, how do we stay in the US? How do we get the visas? How do we raise capital? Like
Mhm.
all of those kinds of things. That was definitely, I don't know if I'd call them gremlins, but they were just kind of the things that came next. And then also it was, I think a big part of it is like when you make a big decision like that, it's like the people around you, you kind of have to take them along the journey with you, I noticed. So, that's something that like I know I did with my partner and my co-founders had to do with their partners. And they've all been phenomenally supportive, but we had to take them on the journey of like, okay, well, like here's why we want to do this and here's how it's going to look and the opportunities in front of us.
So you made a decision for yourself, but you had to convince like some other people in your life to do
Yeah.
that. Where strike me, even from the first time I met you, as a very sort of confident guy. Not that you're right all the time, but you're fairly confident in your abilities, and taking a big decision to leave New Zealand and move to San Francisco, the belly of the beast, took a lot of confidence. Where do you think, and you said your parents allowed you to kind of do what you wanted. Where do you think this confidence in yourself has come from in your background?
Look, I think I'd have to give some credit to my parents to start with. We laugh about it now, but like my mom would like tell me I was the best at everything when I was little. And it's like objectively that wasn't true. But, I think like I think that's part of it. I think, look, I had a good education. I went to good schools. I had some great mentors around me who helped me to see more, see more in myself than maybe I saw at those times in my life. And then I think then when you just have a pattern of like things going right, the confidence just compounds. Like the first time you do anything, you feel a bit nervous about it. But then, like, once you've done it a few times, it feels a lot easier. And I think this being my third company and like having been with my first company at the point of like having a mortgage and being down to like my last, I don't know, $10,000, this felt like such a small, like compared to that, it just felt so different. Like it felt so much easier the third time round making that kind of decision.
So part of it might be that you have taken these bigger risks and started a few companies before, so you were able through compounding some of these decisions to build some of that confidence.
Yeah, I also just like tend to have a genuine attitude of like failure is inevitable. Like you can't like win absolutely everything, but like every failure you learn from, and like every like failure in my life has like a great thing has come just like the next thing has great, always been great. And I think that's just like a mentality I've always taken is like you're not going to win. It's kind of like with poker, right? Like you're not going to win every hand. Like I don't know, we met playing poker. Like you're not going to win every hand, but as long as you pay attention to why you're losing and the other players and like the table and like stay focused, if you lock in for a session, like you'll do all right. And that's kind of like the mentality I've always taken is like it's going to work out as long as you just I don't know, like do what you need to do.
Do what you need to do, or continue to make the best. The way I say it is continuing to make the best decisions you can with the information you have
Yeah,
at the time.
totally.
Like in poker, you listen to my talk with Alec Torelli. In poker, you've got two cards. You don't know what any of the next ones are. You have to make a capital allocation decision with the little information that you have. And in order to do that, you have to understand all the math of all that, but you have to understand, the people as well. But if you string together enough good decisions, even if someone plays the odds against you and has an outlier outcome, hits a one outer or something, as long as you keep playing with good decisions over time, you're
Exactly.
going to net out to the positive, and you found that. So let's talk a little bit about poker. How have you found any use of poker strategies as a CEO or not? Is there any commonalities that you find there between poker and being a CEO and making these kind of decisions?
Look, I think yes is the short answer. You know, you I would talk about this like when we were fundraising, like you play the cards you've got in front of you right now, and like, and then like what's on the table is kind of like the ecosystem. Is like the board, right? And if you're going out to raise and you've got like low revenues, then okay, that's the card you've got to play. So like,
Yeah.
figure out how you're going to play that card, and or if you're in a really crowded marketplace, I kind of looked at that as like, okay, well the table's full, everyone's in this pot. So I don't know. I think like that's part of it is just like play the cards you've got. Well, you're always going to have limited information, but you just try and play it the best way you can with the limited information you have each time. And like business is like that, right? Like every decision we make on, a go to market bet or a product bet is like we're doing it with limited information, and more information is going to come on the next turn. And we're going to then update.
As a CEO, like, can you share? You talk about the big decision of starting the company and moving, but are there any frameworks that you use on a capital allocation decision? You mentioned one with employees. You give people a 90-day try before you buy thing, which is I think is a very good CEO tactic for any employee. But are there other things that you do for making go-to-market decisions, making, development hire decisions, or other frameworks that you use to try to minimize the risk in a low information environment?
Yeah, look, I guess like part like it's always like risk mitigation, right? So like if we look at hiring someone, like what are you trying to do? You're trying to in a very limited time frame, like figure out can they do the job and what's the risk of them not working out? And you're trying to do that really quickly. And like how are you doing that? Well, you're asking them specific questions, you're checking references, you're doing background checks, like all of that kind of stuff. So do I have like a specific framework around that? Not one that I've documented, although I'm probably running. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I've documented some of these things, which is why I'm like maybe waffling around the question a little bit. But like, yes, there are definitely frameworks or plays that I'm running that are maybe not explicit, but yes,
Well, most of the ones that I use in a low information environment, one of the ones I use a lot, and I'm sure you use it as a CEO too, is to try to get a little more information as cheaply as possible. So, for
yeah,
example, in poker, if it's going around and there's been three limps before me, and I'm at the end, I might just limp with really shitty cards because it's actually a very low cost way to get more information, which is the three cards to see if I have anything. And if it's a low cost, like if I'm the fifth person to limp, I've got a 1 in 5 chance already to hit my hand. Even if my cards are really terrible, a 1 in 5 chance is pretty good if it's cheap enough, if it's a $5 or whatever. So that's certainly one. thing that I do, and it sounds like, when you try employees before you buy them, or even in go to market, I know that your company, you've tried different go to market paths, but you take a small amount of money and try this channel, a small amount of money and try that channel, and then you
Exactly.
double down on the other one. So it's getting a little more information in a low information environment as cheaply as you can, and then deciding which ones are working before you put out the big bet. Is that something
Totally.
that you'd say that you do?
Totally. Like we're doing that right now, for example, with ad spend. It's like historically at Grow, all of our customers have come via inbound or referrals. And we're now starting to do ad spend. And, what do you do when you just start a new channel? Is we're putting, a small experimental budget to try a few different ad channels and see which one, see what the results are, and then update each week based on what we're learning, and increase the budgets from there. So yeah, exactly. Buy a little bit more information and then make a better decision afterwards.
Yeah. Try to get more information as cheaply as possible.
A big one is on
Great.
like another one's on hiring. Like I'm like a big proponent, for example, of using some sort of psychometric testing through the hiring process. It's so cheap, to
Oh,
do a
yeah?
psychometric test, but you learn a lot from that process, and it's prevented some bad hires, and then it's
So explain
also.
that a little bit more.
Yeah, so like a bit, like salespeople particularly, and a good example is a hire that we didn't make because something came up in her psychometric profile that for me was a red flag. It basically presented to me that she was not going to stick around in the tough times. She was like a bit
Okay.
flighty as a character, and like
Right.
up until that point, everything was looking good. Like amazing looking candidate, interviewed exceptionally well, came from a, trusted introduction. But then when that came out, then what I did is, okay, like that's some cheap information, like to use your, the framework you just mentioned. Then when I spoke to her again and like started digging a little bit around that area, found out, oh, okay, that's not going to be a fit for us. Because when I
She's
when I
she's
scratched the surface, she was the wrong kind of person for an early stage startup.
she's opportunistic and is only gonna stick around through the good times. Yeah, I that's a good thing to know early.
Yeah. Well, especially at seed stage, right? Where, let's be honest, you're shoveling shit for
Yeah.
a fair amount of the time, because that's what early stage is.
Yeah, one of the frameworks I used when I was a CEO, and I learned it the hard way, is I wanted to only hire people who had already had some startup experience and knew the depth of the shit that they were getting into. I hired a couple people as their first startup job. It's like, oh, I'm working at Microsoft. I think doing the startup thing would be cool. Let me go to a startup. I hired a guy like that, and the first day on the job, he comes into my office. He says, "Where's my assistant?" And I said, What the fuck are you talking about, assistant? Like we don't have assistants here." He was just that first time out of the big company, even if they have a great resume, the culture shock of what you have to do, all the hats you have to wear in a startup tends to be, a poor fit for a lot of people. So I want people who have maybe worked at a big tech, but then worked at a startup, and then I'm their second time startup founder or startup hire, because they kind of know what they're getting themselves into, versus people that just have this dream of what a startup might be like because of what they read in TechCrunch or whatever. But if they don't understand the actual job, it can be tricky.
Totally. Well, like, and I think that goes like twofold for like salespeople in particular, because if you've been working for Google and you've got Google's marketing engine behind you and all
Yeah.
of the support, and then you go into a seed stage startup or early stage company, and you're having to sell something that is half built, and they have
Yeah,
no marketing budget. It's like it's a very different kind of person who could be successful doing the latter.
definitely. Okay. Well, I know we have a lot of founders that listen to this, or people that potentially want to be founders. As we wrap up here, are there any things that you would say to people that were potentially thinking about making a big life shift from a safe job or a safe career to doing a startup, of how you would recommend that they think about it, or things that you found useful in your decision that they could use?
I think accurately looking at what the downside is helpful. I think a lot of people don't do that, and maybe it seems a lot scarier because they haven't actually mapped the downside. So like in my case, like what was the realistic downside? Okay, my net worth doesn't grow as much for a year or two, and I have to go back to doing what I was doing and like so what? That was like my worst case. When you actually like map the downside, it's a lot less scary
Map
than
the
it
downside.
sometimes can feel. And then I also think like if you should take into account like where you're at in your life as well, because if you're in your 20s or early 30s, that downside is just by sheer fact of time almost immaterial, really, like when you look at it objectively. And then I think maybe the only other thing I would add is everyone around you is going to have an opinion about what you should do. And at the end of the day, they have far less information than you. And, make your own decision, but then just be prepared to take the people around you who, your partner, your family, just like you have to take them along the journey so that they can feel okay with the decision. Like in my case, it's all well and good me saying, like, yes, we're moving to San Francisco. But my partner's like, that impacts her too. It impacts her job. It
Yeah, yeah,
impacts her friends,
her
her family.
job and everything, yeah.
So I
So
think
take the
like that's
people
the other
along,
side of it. Take people along the journey with you because it's going to make it a lot easier.
make it a lot easier. Okay, I think those are very usable by other people, and I appreciate it. So, where can people find stuff about you? Your website, Grw.AI. Are you active on LinkedIn or Twitter if anybody wants to talk to you?
LinkedIn and Twitter, mostly LinkedIn. Like I'm more active on LinkedIn because that's where most of our customers hang out, but I am on Twitter too. And yeah, Grw.AI is where they can learn more about Grow.
All right. Well, thanks for your time, Alex. I really appreciate your perspective. I learned some things.
Thanks a lot, Martin.